Last time, we learned how to use the deck constructor to create a deck object. In this lecture, you'll learn how to access the single property of that deck object. So if we look at the deck documentation, we see that it actually only exposes a single property. It exposes the empty property, and so that's the property we're going to access here. As we read the documentation, there are a few pieces of information that are important. The first is this thing called bool, and we haven't actually talked about the bool data type yet. We'll do that in the next module. So this is just a data type that can either be true or false. And the bool here in this documentation says that this property is a bool. So if we read or get this property, it's going to give us true or false. We'll worry about setting or writing properties later because we can't do it with this property. And that is shown by the fact that it only lists get in the list of things we can do with this property. So if it lists get, we can read it. If it lists set, we can write it. And if it lists both, we can both read it and write it. So given that information, we have enough information to actually go write some code to access this property. We'll start with the code that we ended with last time, and we'll stop printing the deck, but we will access and print empty property. And I'm going to show you two ways to do this. The first way we can do this is we can access the property and store the return value into a variable and then print the value of the variable. And then I'll show you another way to do it after we've done that. As I mentioned as we were reading the documentation, the empty property returns a bool, and even though we haven't looked at the bool data type yet, we will when we start talking about selection, but we haven't talked about it yet. But I'll tell you, the data type is just called bool, and I'll say is empty, and then I'll set that variable equal to accessing the empty property of the deck. So how do we know we're accessing a property rather than calling a method? We know we're accessing a property because we don't have parentheses here. We had parentheses when we called the constructor, which you can think of as a special kind of method, and we had parentheses here when we called the print method, but here we don't have any parentheses. And that's how you can easily tell, and that's how the compiler can tell, that you're accessing a property instead of calling a method. Now that we've accessed the property and put it into the isEmpty variable, let's go ahead and print that out. And it helped me by giving me some extra parentheses there that I don't need, so I just got rid of those. And we can go ahead and run our code now. And we can see that deck empty is false, which makes sense, right? We have 52 cards in the deck, so of course it isn't empty. As I said, I would show you another way that we can access and print the empty property, and we can do it without actually putting the result into a variable first. So I'll take this code and I'll copy it here. And now I'm going to comment out this code because I don't want this code to run right now. Here's a nice trick in Visual Studio. Up here on the top menu bar, right below the search box, you can click this button to comment out the selected lines. Remember, I selected those lines first. So now I click that, and those lines have been commented out. And if I want to uncomment them, I can just click the button to the right of that one and it will uncomment selected lines. So that's a handy feature in Visual Studio. If you want to comment out blocks of code you don't want to run right now, but I didn't want to delete them because I wanted to give them to you in the lecture code that I give you with this video. Of course, I get a compilation error here because I no longer have this isEmpty variable, but I can just access the property directly, like so. And if I run the code again, you can see it is accessing the property properly and is providing the same answer, the correct answer, that the deck is not empty. And that's how we access a property for the deck class and any class that actually exposes properties. To recap, in this lecture, you learned how to access the property of a deck object.